The sun bled slowly into the horizon, staining the desert sky in copper and fire. Shadows stretched long across the Apache camp, where smoke curled from small fires, carrying the smell of cedar and maize. The air was calm, but not empty, alive with the murmurs of women, the distant laughter of children, and the quiet rhythm of hands weaving, grinding, mending. Clara moved among them, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her pale hands dusted with cornmeal. Her hair, once carefully pinned for a wedding that never came, now carried the scent of smoke and the desert wind. Around her wrist, tied like a fragile ghost, clung a strip of her old bridal veil. It no longer marked humiliation. It had become something else, a reminder that even broken cloth could be bound to a new purpose. The women watched her still, some with caution, others with a faint respect earned by persistence. Clara bent to help an elder with a heavy basket, and though words failed between their languages, a nod of gratitude passed, small, but enough. Children dashed by with dust rising at their heels, laughter quick as sparrows. One stopped, wide-eyed at Clara, then grinned before vanishing into the evening. Nia stood at the camp's edge, bow slung across his back, watching the ridge where the sun slipped lower. His gaze lingered a moment on Clara, her movements quiet, deliberate, as though she were learning the camp's rhythm the way one learns the beat of a drum. When darkness deepened, the drums themselves began, low and steady. Their sound was not celebration but heartbeat, binding sky, earth, and flesh together. Clara sat near the fire, warmth brushing her face, and for the first time since Dusty Creek, silence felt less like exile and more like belonging. The last light clung to the ridge like embers reluctant to fade. The camp had settled into its evening rhythm. Children called home, fires dimmed, elders muttering stories to the young. Yet the silence that followed felt heavier than usual, as if the desert itself had chosen to hold its breath. From the west, a rider broke across the horizon, his horse foaming, breath tearing in quick bursts. Dust curled behind them like a torn banner. He did not dismount when he reached the camp's edge. His eyes were wide, the white stark against skin hardened by sun and travel. "Men," he rasped, his voice cutting through the calm. "Riders on the plain, some in blue coats, some without, too many to count." His chest heaved, the horse stamped, restless with the urgency it carried. Nia stepped forward, calm even as his jaw tightened. His eyes scanned the ridge, then the faces of his people. He raised a hand, not high, but firm. "Douse the fires," he said. "Hide the children in stone shadow. Tonight the drums are silent." In an instant, movement rippled through the camp. Women scooped up little ones, guiding them toward the gullies carved deep into the earth. Younger men slipped to the edges, boughs in hand, their shapes merging with twilight. Elders began gathering herbs, water, and blankets, each gesture practiced as though rehearsed many times before. Clara stood frozen for a heartbeat, the warning sinking into her bones. Her eyes lifted to the ridge, where shadows stretched too long to be only stone. She thought of Dusty Creek, of Thomas's eyes sharp with accusation, and she felt the echo of his voice carried on the desert wind. The fires hissed out. Darkness came faster. The camp, once alive with sound, now listened with every nerve. And in that waiting quiet, the desert prepared to judge again. Night gathered with a weight that pressed against the earth. The stars came sharp, like cold needles pricking a sky that refused to soften. In the center of camp, only one fire remained, crackling low, its flames speaking in whispers rather than shouts. Nia sat near it, his bow across his knees. He pulled the string slowly, testing its tautness. The sound soft as breath, deliberate as thought. Sparks leapt now and then, flashing in his eyes before fading into the vast dark. His posture was calm, but his silence was heavy, like stone holding back a river. Clara sat opposite, hands resting on her knees. She had tried to busy herself, tending children, folding blankets, mending straps. But now that quiet had claimed the camp, all that was left was waiting. She thought of Dusty Creek, of the church doors slamming shut on her dignity, of the desert nights that almost broke her. Tonight felt the same, like the edge of something too big to name. Her gaze fell to the strip of white tied at her wrist. Once it had marked shame. Tonight it looked like a question. Was it memory or defiance? She touched it lightly, then looked at Nia. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice trembling in the firelight. "It's him." Nia did not answer at once. His thumb ran over the bowstring again, a sound like a faint hum. When he finally spoke, the words were low, carried by the wind that swept through the camp. "One man is not the storm," he said, "but the fire he brings can burn the desert if left untended." Coyotes cried from far hills, voices rising and falling like a warning. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. Night had teeth, and every soul in the camp felt them. The first light was thin, gray, hesitant. For a moment, the camp seemed untouched, cloaked in a stillness that almost felt like safety. But safety in the desert is always an illusion. The shot came suddenly, louder than thunder, sharper than a bell. It tore through the morning silence, rattling the earth awake. Horses screamed, children cried, and the lodges shook with splintering wood. Smoke rose where no smoke should be. Nia was already moving before Clara could draw breath. His bow lifted, string taut, arrow flying. A rider fell hard, dust swallowing his body before his cry could finish. The camp erupted, men and women scattering to their places. Children swept into the arms of those who ran toward the gullies. Clara staggered, heart hammering, clutching at the earth to steady herself. She saw a woman throw a blanket over a burning lodge, another shove a boy into the safety of stone shadow. She heard the crack of rifles, sharp, merciless, and the answering twang of arrows released with all the force of desperation. Her own hands trembled. The elder had pressed a bow into them days before, and now it was no longer a symbol, but survival. She fumbled at the string, breath ragged, forcing her fingers to remember what they had been taught in quiet hours. The camp was no longer a place of laughter and songs. It had become a battlefield, every shadow alive with danger, every heartbeat racing against death. Smoke curled low, stinging her eyes. Through it she saw Nia, his movements swift, every strike deliberate, the calm of a man who had prepared for this day his entire life. Clara rose from her knees. The desert had kicked the door open, and there was no stepping back inside. Through the smoke and chaos, a single figure cut through the dust like a blade. Thomas rode tall in the saddle, his preacher's coat flapping behind him, face hard with purpose. The sun caught in his eyes, cold and sharp, as though he were a man anointed by righteousness. Around him riders pressed close, their rifles flashing, their shouts fierce. But Thomas's voice rose above them, steady, practiced, the kind of voice that once swayed a town and now sought to command the desert itself. "There she is," he called, reining his horse to a halt at the camp's broken circle. "The liar, the stolen bride. Hand her over, and this ends." The words cut through smoke, through fire, through fear. Men glanced at each other. Women froze, children clung tighter to their mothers. It was not the rifles that frightened them most, but the conviction in his voice, the belief that his will was law. Clara stepped forward. Dust clung to her face, her white wrist tie dulled by ash. For a heartbeat she felt the weight of Dusty Creek again, the murmurs, the judgment, the cold turning of backs. But the desert was not a church, and she was no longer that abandoned bride. Her voice came low but steady, strong enough to travel the length of the circle. "I was never yours, Thomas, not then, not now." He smiled, thin and cruel, a preacher's grin without a prayer in it. "Then the desert will take you both." His hand lifted. The signal was clear. Rifles barked again, bullets cutting the air, tearing through wood and cloth. A lodge caught flame, sparks rising like a twisted hymn. The camp bent, but it did not break, and Clara, standing tall in the storm, refused to bow. Amid the smoke and gunfire, Clara's eyes caught a flash of movement. Two boys frozen near the drying racks, their small frames stiff with terror. They did not cry. They did not run. They simply stood, paralyzed, as if the earth had nailed their feet into the dust. Her chest tightened. Every instinct screamed for her to hide, to stay in the shelter of the lodges, but she saw the rifles swinging toward the open ground, saw the boy's stillness like targets painted against the morning. Without thought, she moved. Her skirt tore as she ran, boots striking hard, breath burning in her lungs. A bullet split the earth inches from her foot. Another hissed past her ear like an angry wasp. Still she pressed forward. She scooped the younger boy into her arms, clutching him tight against her chest, and with her free hand yanked the older by his tangled hair. There was no time for gentleness. Survival was all there was. The rider came fast, carbine low, eyes locked on her. Clara spun, heart hammering, and in her grip was the bow she had been given. Her fingers shook but found the string. She drew, breath ragged, and loosed. The arrow struck, cloth ripped, flesh yielded, and the man tumbled from his saddle. His horse screamed, bolting into the chaos. Clara gasped, trembling, staring at what she had done. There was no triumph, no horror, only the shocking realization that she was still alive, and so were the children. She shoved them into the rock shadow where women pulled them close, safe in arms stronger than fear. Clara leaned against the stone, chest heaving, bow still in her grip. Morning no longer smelled of cedar and corn. It smelled of powder, blood, and the iron taste of becoming something new. Clara pressed her back against the stone, lungs burning, when a shadow fell across her. A bluecoat leveled his rifle, his mouth curling in a sneer she didn't need to understand. The barrel rose, steady and sure. The shot never came. A flicker of silver cut the air, Naya's knife, swift and precise, flashing once in the sunlight before sinking deep. The soldier's eyes went wide, his body stiffened, then crumpled into the dust. Nia stood behind him, chest heaving, blood seeping down his sleeve. Clara's relief lasted only a breath. More riders closed in, their boots pounding, their rifles spitting fire. The camp's defenses strained, bending like branches in storm. Nia pulled the knife free, his voice low but urgent. "Rock Ridge, there is a cut the horses cannot take. Lead the children." Clara shook her head, defiance in her eyes. "Not without you." "With me," he answered, and moved again into the smoke. Clara crouched, fumbling with the small pouch the elder woman had pressed into her hand the night before. "Smoke for eyes," the words echoed in her mind. She tore it open with her teeth, scattering its dark powder low across the ground. The wind caught it, swirling grit and bitter herbs into a choking veil. The attackers coughed, eyes streaming, aim broken. Clara seized the moment. A fallen carbine lay half buried in the dirt. She grabbed it, braced it awkwardly against her shoulder, and pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted her, but the shot found its mark. One man dropped, another stumbled blind. Nia's bow sang once more, finishing the flanks. The circle of enemies faltered, confusion cutting deeper than any blade. For the first time that morning, it was not Thomas's will that commanded the desert. It was theirs. The camp lay heavy with smoke, the cries of the wounded mixing with the hiss of burning wood. Arrows and bullets had thinned the assault, but the danger was far from gone. And then, through the haze, Thomas dismounted. He stepped into the circle of trampled earth, revolver loose in his hand, preacher's coat dark with dust. He walked like a man entering a pulpit, his eyes hard, his mouth curved in something meant to resemble a smile. "Clara," he called, his voice carrying above the groans and fire. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. You know where you belong." Nia moved to stand between them, knife still red, his left arm bound in cloth torn from his shirt. But Clara stepped forward before he could answer. Her chest rose and fell with each ragged breath, and yet her eyes held steady. "I belonged to Dusty Creek once," she said, voice low but sharp as steel. "And it cast me out. I will never belong to you." Thomas's smile thinned, curdling into contempt. "Then the desert will be your grave." He raised the revolver. The world seemed to pause. Smoke curled around his arm like a serpent. Every heartbeat in the camp hung suspended. Clara lifted the carbine. Her hands were raw, shoulders aching, but her aim was true. She squeezed the trigger. The shot rang sharp as judgment. Sparks leapt from Thomas's hand. The revolver flew, clattering into the dust. For a second, disbelief froze his face. Shock that she had defied him, that she had struck not his body but his claim to power. Murmurs spread through the camp. The circle of riders wavered. Thomas's jaw clenched, eyes burning with a promise not yet spoken. He spat into the dust, yanked his reins, and wheeled his horse away. He did not retreat in defeat. He retreated in promise. When the dust finally settled, silence rolled heavy across the camp. Smoke drifted from blackened lodge poles, curling upward like prayers for what had been lost. The cries of children quieted to whimpers. The clash of steel and thunder was gone, replaced by the ache of breathing through grief. Two elders lay still, their bodies covered with blankets woven by hands that once listened to their stories. A boy, no older than 12, sat with his head bandaged, staring at the ground as if afraid to lift his eyes. A horse lay on its side, chest heaving, each breath louder than the crack of gunfire. The women moved quickly, binding wounds with strips of cloth, pressing herbs against bleeding skin. Men gathered arrows from the dust, salvaging what they could. Even in ruin, life insisted on moving forward. Clara knelt beside Nia. His face was pale, sweat shining on his brow. The wound in his arm bled slow but steady, cloth soaked through. Her hands shook as she opened the pouch of herbs given to her, pressing the mixture into the cut. Nia winced but did not pull away. She tore the veil strip from her wrist, the last piece of her bridle passed, and bound it tight over the herbs, white turning red as it drank his blood. For the first time, the strip no longer looked like memory or shame. It looked like a vow. Nia's gaze followed her hands, then lifted to her eyes. "You did not run," he murmured, voice low, tired but firm. Clara swallowed, her throat dry, her face streaked with dust and sweat. "The desert has no way," she whispered. "Only through." Around them the camp mourned and rebuilt in the same breath. And in that fragile moment, Clara was no longer outsider. She was warrior. The night deepened, carrying the scent of ash and blood. Around the dim glow of a single fire, the elders gathered, their faces painted with smoke and grief. They spoke slowly, each word heavy as though the desert itself weighed on their tongues. Clara sat nearby, listening, though she could not understand all the words. The rhythm of their voices, the cadence of silence between phrases carried meaning enough. The camp had survived, but survival demanded more than standing among ruins. A choice had to be made. One elder, his hair white as desert bone, pressed his staff into the ground. His voice trembled with age but cut sharp. "The riders will return. Not tomorrow, perhaps not next moon, but they will return. To stay here is to invite the grave." Another, her hands scarred from years of weaving, lifted her chin. "The land has carried us. These stones know our names. To leave is to bury more than the dead. It is to bury ourselves." The council murmured. The fire snapped. Children slept huddled against their mothers, their dreams uneasy. Nia, arm bound in Clara's veil strip, spoke with quiet resolve. "The desert bends. We bend with it. To stand unyielding against storm is to break. To move is to live." The debate lingered, but the truth hung clear in the smoke. At last, heads bowed in agreement. The camp would scatter at dawn. Those who could walk would travel. Those too weak would remain hidden in the stone places where the sun forgot to look. Fires would be buried, footprints brushed away, belongings tied tight. Clara felt the weight of the decision settle in her chest. This was no flight. It was survival carved into motion. And when the people rose with first light, she rose with them. The morning broke pale, the sky the color of forged steel. The camp no longer looked like a home, but a memory folded tight. Lodges pulled down, fires buried, footprints brushed away with cedar boughs. Only silence remained, heavy as stone. Clara walked at the front, leading children through the narrow paths between rocks. Her voice carried steady, counting each small head aloud, turning numbers into protection. Behind her, women bore bundles, men carried bows, and the elders moved slowly but firmly, their steps measured with the weight of centuries. Nia kept to the flank, bow across his back, his injured arm bound but his gaze sharp. His eyes swept the horizon, not for beauty but for warning. By noon, the ridge lay far behind them, the land opening wide into a plain of dust and brittle grass. Heat rose in wavering curtains. For a moment the silence felt too large, too open, as though the desert itself was watching. Then Clara saw it. A faint line against the horizon, a smear of brown rising where no wind stirred. Dust, too high, too steady to be the desert alone. She narrowed her eyes, heart tightening. Riders. The word rippled through the column like a chill. Faces turned. Mothers clutched children closer. Men's hands tightened on bowstrings. The line grew. From it, figures emerged. Horses dark against the glare, rifles glinting. Blue coats marched alongside men with no colors at all, united only by greed. And behind them, not in front, rode Thomas. He held himself one length back, watching, learning, his face unreadable but his eyes burning with promise. Nia pointed toward a crescent of stone rising from the plain, a natural wall carved long ago by water now gone. "There," he said, "we bend, and we do not break." The people moved into position. The desert held its breath once more. The crescent wall of stone rose like a shield, and behind it the people stood ready. Dust thickened on the horizon, riders spreading wide, their rifles catching the morning glare. The demand came sharp. "Hand over the white woman." Clara stepped forward. Her voice carried steady, her heart pounding but unyielding. "I am not to be handed. I am one of them. I am home." The riders laughed, but Thomas did not. His eyes burned, fixed on the strip of veil at her wrist, white-stained crimson. For the first time his face showed doubt. The first shot cracked, and the plain erupted. Rifles barked, arrows sang, dust and fire tangled in the air. Clara braced the carbine, firing shot after shot. Each recoil numbed her shoulder, each echo reminded her she was no longer prey. She fought for family, for belonging. Nia stood beside her, blood soaking his arm, but his stance unbroken. "Hold," he whispered, loosing an arrow that struck true. Around them the warriors moved as one, their voices rising in fierce song that drowned the thunder of hooves. The enemy line faltered. 2 riders fell, another turned back. Confusion spread like cracks in dry earth, and then Thomas broke forward, revolver raised. Clara lifted her rifle. Their eyes met, the man who had destroyed her life and the woman he had sworn to erase. She did not tremble. She fired. The revolver spun from his hand. His horse reared and Thomas tumbled into the dust. Silence swept the field as his men scattered, unwilling to follow a broken leader. When the smoke cleared, Clara still stood, chest heaving, veil strip tied firm around Nia's arm. The elders gathered, voices raised not in mourning but in triumph. They placed their hands on Clara's shoulders one by one, naming her daughter of the people. As the sun burned gold across the desert, Clara looked to Nia. For the first time she was not running, not hiding, not waiting. She was home.